So we're continuing on with our look at the different inheritances and the regions that the different tribes possess. Previously, we saw the eastern side of the Jordan River, the places that they took before entering into the Promised Land, when Moses was still with them. And then after that, we looked at the inheritances of the tribe of Judah. And today we are going to be looking at Joseph. Now, Joseph's kind of an interesting character or person. He originally was sold into slavery by his brothers and went down to Egypt. And when he was in Egypt, he prepared the way for the great famine, so that when the famine hit, Jacob and his descendants took refuge in Egypt, and Joseph helped protect them. Joseph had two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. His two sons, Jacob, adopted them into the family, so they became their own tribes. So this is the method or the mechanism that allows for 12 tribes to be defined in different ways to always have 12. So Joseph, because he's got two sons and they can both be counted combined as the tribe of Joseph, or independently as the tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Ephraim. And if we recall previously, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, part of the tribe of Manasseh, half the tribe of Manasseh, whether it was literally half or just a portion of it that was approximately half, got inheritance on the eastern side, but they still needed more land, so they're going to have land on the western side of the Jordan River. I hope that makes sense. The book of Joshua 16:1. The allotment for the people of Joseph went from the Jordan by Jericho, east of the waters of Jericho, into the wilderness, going up from Jericho into the hill country to Bethel. 16:2. Then it went from Bethel to Luz, and passed on to Ataroth, the border of the Archites. 16:3. And it went down westward to the territory of the Japhelites, as far as the outskirts of Lower Beth Horon, then to Gezer, and ended up at the sea. So we're looking at the combined inheritance right here, before the subdivision. The book of Joshua. 16:4. The descendants of Joseph, Manasseh, and Ephraim received their inheritance. 16:5. The boundary of the Ephraimites, according to their families, was thus. On the east side, their border was Ataroth Adar, as far as Upper Beth Horon. 16:6. The boundary went from there to the sea. On the north was Mishmephan. Then on the east, the boundary went out to Tanoth Shilon, and eastward to Janoah. 16:7. Then it went down from Janoah to Ataroth and to Naarah, touched Jericho, and ended at the Jordan River. 16:8. The border went out from Tappuah westward to the brook Kanah, and ended at the Mediterranean Sea. This is the inheritance of the Ephraimites by their families. 16:9. With the towns set apart for the Ephraimites within the inheritance of the Manassites, all those towns with their villages. 16:10. But they did not drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell among the Ephraimites to this day, and they became slaves required to do forced labor. Reaching the end of chapter 16, the most interesting thing I found was the idea that they were able to take possession of this land but they were unable to drive out their enemies from before them. They were not able to fully subjugate it. Now they've made their enemy their slave, but that can only be a temporary state, for eventually when they get their freedom, they are going to demand recompense and may even vengeance. And as such, they will be a thorn in the side of the Israelites for decades or centuries or even millennia into the future. The book of Joshua. 17:1. The allotment was made for the tribe of Manasseh, for he was the firstborn of Joseph. To Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, were allotted Gilead and Bashan, because he was a man of war. So the tribe of Manasseh is quite impressive in what they were able to do, and that's why they had possessions of the land on the eastern side. They were warrior people, and they took cities and took possession of these cities, and they retained ownership and possession of that land, and this was sanctioned by the Lord. But when it comes to the land on the western side, they're also going to receive a rather large portion as well. They are a pretty big tribe. So the way that the land is to be distributed, it's to be distributed based on populations. And we see that Manasseh is going to receive a rather large amount of land. Manasseh was one of the tribes that throughout the different surveys that we have witnessed or seen, they have grown tremendously in population. They were a very small tribe when they first left Egypt, but after the wilderness wandering, they grew during the wilderness wandering, and they continued to grow, and they were a very mighty tribe. The book of Joshua. 17:2. Allotment was also made for the other Manassites by their families, for the sons of Abiezar of Halek, Asriel, Shechem, Hepher, and Shemidah, the male offspring of Manasseh, son of Joseph, by their families. 17:3. But Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, had no sons, but only daughters. Their names were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Teresa. So we have seen these women mentioned numerous times now. There was no male heir in the family, so there was no one to take the inheritance. So they requested permission to be able to take inheritance, and that permission was granted, and it sort of set up a new standard that in the event that something like this happens, that then it could go to the daughters. So the way that land and property worked in Israel is very different than what we see in the modern Western world. In Israel, the land was to be possessed by a family, and it wasn't really supposed to leave the family, that it was supposed to go one generation to the next. One inherits from the previous generation, so everything is retained that way. And if they were to sell the land to somebody else, it would be what we would refer to as a lease. They would sell it for so many years, and then they would get the land back at the end of those years. There was a fixed schedule that the land would be returned. So depending on how close you were to the year of release, it would change the value of the land. So because the inheritance and the way that it works generationally, it made inheritance of land very important. So having exceptions set up in place for events where there was no heir was very important and a very key to the long-term strategy of this inheritance system of inheriting the land from one's fathers. So anyway, these women here, they got this permission that they could inherit this land, and that's just being referenced here to that special exception that was made, and then it became like a standard afterwards so that it would apply to others as well, because who knows what's going to happen a couple hundred years from now, right? Like what someone's family is going to be. So this definitely happened more than just this one time. The book of Joshua. 17:4. they came before Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun and the leaders and said, the Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance with our brethren. So according to the Lord's command, Joshua gave them an inheritance among their father's brethren. 17:5. So there fell 10 portions to Manasseh, besides the land of Gilead and Bashan, which is on the other side of the Jordan. 17:6. Because the 5 daughters of Manasseh received an inheritance among his 5 sons, the land of Gilead belonged to the other half of the Manassites. So this is just a continuation of that same idea of possessing the land by lots and by population and proportion, that there's these other people, these women here that are inheriting land, that they are receiving their portion, and the total amount of portions being referenced. The book of Joshua. 17:7. The territory of Manasseh reached from Asher to Michmephel, east of Shechem, and the border went along southward to the inhabitants of En-Tapura. So we're kind of just establishing the perimeter here, or the area that is going to be received as the inheritance. The book of Joshua. 17:9. Then the boundary went down to the brook of Cana, the cities south of the brook, lying among the cities of Manasseh, belonged to Ephraim. But Manasseh's boundary went on north of the brook and ended at the sea. 17:10. The land to the south was Ephraim's, and that to the north was Manasseh's, and the sea was the boundary on the north. Asher was reached, and on the east Issachar. 17:11. Also Manasseh had in Issachar and in Asher these 6 towns, their inhabitants and their villages: Beth-shean, Ebelim, Dor, Endor, Tanakh, and Megiddo. 17:12. Yet the sons of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. So this is something that we see again. They have acquired these large swaths of land, but they have been unable to drive out the locals. This is going to be a problem down the road. The book of Joshua. 17:13. When the Israelites became strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out. 17:14. The tribe of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, Why have you given us but one lot and one portion as an inheritance, when we are a great, abundant people? For until now the Lord has blessed us. So they received a portion of land, but they thought they should have received more. Perhaps they were treated as one tribe, rather than being treated as 2 independent ones, and as such they didn't receive as much inheritance. It could also be that some of the territory was uninhabitable, that it needed a lot of work to be inhabited, and it wasn't readily apparent that it was the size that it was. So some of these matters are going to be cleared up in the next verse, the book of Joshua. 17:15. Joshua replied, If you are a great people, get up to the forest and clear ground for yourselves in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, since the Ephraim hill country is too narrow for you. So the territory is a good size. They simply need to take possession of it, and Joshua is pointing out here that if they're a great and mighty people, They can do the work to receive the land. They can cut down the forest. They can drive out the parasites and the Raphaim, the giants in the land, and then they can have possession of it. The Book of Joshua 17:16. The Josephites said, the hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who dwell in the valley have iron chariots, both those in Bethshean and its villages, and in the valley of Jezreel. So Joshua has already given them the answer. They need to drive out their enemies, and they need to do a little bit of work to the land to make it inhabitable, but there is plenty of it there. But perhaps they are afraid of the people that are in possession of the land. They have powerful chariots and these cities and villages, and they're just not ready to commit, it seems. There's a little bit of hesitation. The Book of Joshua 17:17. And Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim, and to Manasseh, you are a great and numerous people, and have great power. You shall not have only one lot. 17:18. But the hill country shall be yours, though it is a forest. You shall clear and possess it in its furthest borders. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots and are strong. So Joshua here, he's kind of putting his foot down. He's letting them know this is the land they're going to get. There is no substitute. There is no exchange. This is the land. And they can have it. And they can take possession of it. Yeah, there's some work involved, but they can do this. The Lord can help them out. He can help them drive out the Canaanites, even with their fancy chariots. We have seen the Lord bless and lead the people to great victory time and time again. But the weakness of the flesh is the weakness of the flesh. Sometimes it just sucks.